Whether it's the legendary F1, the iconic SLR, or one of the many modern cars from McLaren, there's a ton to love about the brand from Woking. And today we have our top 10 McLaren VINwiki car stories. So I hope you'll enjoy those. I also hope that you'll thank Premier Financial Services for their support of this video and this month of VINwiki car stories. Premier's Simple Lease is one of the most powerful tools in the world of exotic car financing. They allow you to minimize your down payment, keep your payments low, use all the tax benefits of a leasing structure with a lot more flexibility than most leases could ever offer. They allow you to move in and out of cars and build equity as you see your amortization table broken down for every month of the lease. It's a great product that I've used personally, helped other friends and customers use over the years, and I think you'll love it too. So please check out Premier Financial Services at the link in the description of this video and thank them for their support of VINwiki.
In the 918, I don't think about the walls. I just drive. In the P1, I think about the walls. I drove the world's greatest hypercars on one of the world's most dangerous tracks. And I don't want to pick on Road Atlanta. I live right next door. I love driving it. It's gotten better and better. But there's a lot of bare concrete. Concrete creates enormous spikes in G-forces. We were just talking about my friend Sean Rahal, who claims to have had a 90 G impact, which I can easily believe because I've heard numbers like that from the oval tracks before they put in the better soft walls. Especially in the IRL days, I think the gearbox had no absorption in front of it. If they backed into the wall, which often happens with mid-engines cars, it's just metal on metal. And I've hit concrete kind of a few times in my career, and the impact spike. So with this history at Road Atlanta, I get this amazing opportunity through a place called Merit Partners, and it was on a bloody cold day. It was at least in the 30s. And we had all the biggies there. We had the Holy Trinity, LaFerrari, the McLaren P1, Porsche 918. They had a Pagani Huayra BC, which is the tracky one. We had a Carrera GT there, and we had a 488 Pista that I was supposed to drive, but we ran out of time. We did all this on the lunch break, and this is my long tradition with Motor Trend. At Motor Trend, especially at Best Driver's Car, I do the hot laps. Well, every time I do the hot laps, we're making a video. We don't have a lot of time. And I don't need a lot of time. I get into a car and I do the out lap. Typically they have fresh tires on them. Typically fresh, new tires give you magic grip for the first lap or two. And this is so common. I'll go out in some car I never saw before, drive as fast as I dare. I get an out lap to kind of feel it. Then I do a lap, get a time. I've kind of got it figured out now. Oh, I could brake at the 2, not the 3 or the 2.5. I drive it again. I drive everything better, and I'm slower. Now I'm even better at this. I do one more lap. I drive everything better, and I'm slower. Why? The tires are going off. New tires are magic, almost always, especially street DOT type tires. That serves me very well in the video business because you're making a video and you don't have time. You have got to get these laps in, get the data done, and then we're going to drive around and make video the rest of the day. And it eats up a lot of time. You shoot all day for a 8-minute video on some new Ferrari. So I'm the right guy for this job. Also, I've been around. I didn't get these wrinkles by going crazy. And I've won a lot of championships, both myself and as a co-driver, by seeing the big picture, looking downstream, and not taking too much risk right now unless I really have to. Managed risk. And so these cars that were amazing. The LaFerrari, I've never driven it because Ferrari is pretty stingy with their test cars, especially at Motor Trend, where we choose a winner and where we do data. You can't hide. We strip it bare. This is what's happening. Ferrari would do very well, of course. In fact, Ferrari was best driver's car just 2 or 3 years ago with the 488. And the chance to drive a LaFerrari was unbelievable. And all 3 of them were owned by one guy. He was a wonderful man, unbelievable that a guy would just hand the keys. On the other hand, if you've seen me, I've driven all these cars, well, most of them, for Motor Trend. And knock wood, I don't drop a wheel, I don't spin them, I don't go off, and for God's sake, I don't hit anything. We go out on this cold day at Road Atlanta. And another thing about Road Atlanta is the hypercar hybrids are making 900-ish horsepower. I think the Porsche is 887 with the horsepower and the electric power. And the LaFerrari, I don't know, it's a lot. And then the P1. And the P1 and the LaFerrari are 2-wheel drive. The Porsche 918 is 4-wheel drive, which is a tremendous advantage when you've got 900 horsepower on street tires. And then there's the Pagani, which was a complete unknown to me. Paganis are very, very limited production, very, very exclusive. I'd heard that they're art pieces. From end to end, top to bottom, there are artistic touches, And I was like, art car, because I've driven some exotics like that, especially limited production, that are diabolical. I'm thinking, did anybody ever drive this car? What are you thinking? Oh, it's lively. It's like, give me a break. I'm not about lively. I'm about stable, confidence-inspiring handling. Well, we'll start with the 918 because that's what the 918 is about. Confident in the handling balance, confident in the brake zone, traction coming off the corner, and I turn everything off when I drive these cars unless they tell me not to. Sometimes I get a message like, leave that on. Corvette Z06. So the 918, though, I trust that. I can drive that car. Its hybrid braking is beautifully integrated. It's all-wheel drive. It's heavy. But all the hybrids are a little bit heavy because they have all that stuff, the electric motors, the batteries. So I went out in the 918 feeling pretty good. I've driven them a lot. Porsche is so generous with the cars that we test at Motor Trend, and we go out in the 918. They're all 900 horsepower. Remember the straightaway at Road Atlanta? If you've never been there, it goes and goes and goes and goes. And down near the end of it, it bends gently to the right. Well, that bend in 98% of the cars you will ever drive is a straightaway. Easy, flat out. You never even think about it. And, even at 400 or 500 horse, it's a nothing. At 900 horse, it's a something. You're approaching that with a tack going like this through all the gears. You get to the top of 6th gear somewhere in these things. 175, 180 corner. It is now a corner. And so that confidence is so nice. And you come out of the end of that straightaway, going on 180, and the road goes downhill, and you brake. Diabolical design. Road Atlanta used to actually be even more thrilling. In the old days, I raced there. It didn't go straight, stop, left, right. You drop down into a dip super low to the bottom of that bridge that's there now. Back up again, flat out the whole time. Then you braked, aimed at this bridge on a dirt bank. I know because I had my world record crash there. So you come down there, and the 918 was a sweetheart, and it didn't feel that crazy. Next car I drove was the Mclaren P1. Didn't really matter, I'll drive anything. Every Mclaren has real quick turn in. The English love oversteer. Jaguars, every one of them except the XK RS GT, if I'm getting my numbers right, which was beautifully balanced. Definitely had a totally different guy setting that one up. But McLaren loves a quick steering and a lively car on the way into a corner. So we go out into the P1, and The P1 has even more power than the Porsche does, but it's through 2 wheels. And so it's kind of a wild ride. And I can't remember if I was man enough to turn everything off. I might not have been because of the circumstance, part of it being Road Atlanta. But I drove it as fast as I dared. And it was really a thrill. And it was satisfying. And I was so glad when it was over. Because I'm not going to slow down. I'm a slave to the clock. And this is going to be on video. And I can't have some wank look at his time and go, oh, Popes did a 31 at Road Atlanta, and I did a 32. So I had to go. And it's hard, and it's fast, and I think about those walls. In the 918, I don't think about the walls. I just drive. In the P1, I think about the walls, but it's not frightening, I'd say, but it's a lot of work. I come in and I'm sweating just from catching all those little tweaks and twitches and things it does. Really, really fun, though. Then I get in the LaFerrari, which was really fascinating because I've never been in it or anything like it, except maybe a 488. The LaFerrari is a different animal because of that hybrid system, which is not as well integrated as the Porsches. The whole car is, again, wilder. The very strong, very high RPM gasoline engine. The electrical power makes itself aware when it comes in, when it kicks in and when it kicks off. And the gearbox was not really very happy either. The shifts were not as crisp. I think it was because of the hybrid working with the gearbox. And there's a lot of things to integrate there. The sound was world class, probably never better. And the LaFerrari was also a little bit of a wild ride, but not as wild as the McLaren in terms of its pointiness and twitchiness, but it caused more concern where there were things happening that were not terribly well integrated and didn't make me confident about what inputs to give to keep this missile on the pavement. And a missile it was. In all these cars, we go screaming down that long straightaway, and they got faster and faster. And the Ferraris, Italian cars in general, don't feel like they have the brake bite that a Porsche does. Porsche, to me, is the world standard for braking. Good old Corvette, I pick on them sometimes, but they were every bit as good on the braking, even as the best Porsche. The C7. The Ferrari and most Lamborghinis that I've driven in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, they don't have the bite I want. I get on that brake pedal, I got to push really hard, which is something I have always disliked. Don't make me push the brake pedal with all my might. I want to be able to control this. If I'm doing surgery, I don't want to be using a 25-pound scalpel. I want to have control. So it takes a lot of brake effort to get the Ferrari stopped and the McLaren stopped. And there's not a linear relationship between the brake effort and the brake G. Push harder and harder, it doesn't get that much better. And I'm like, well, is it going to get any better? How hard do I have to push? In my 3 or 4 laps, those thoughts are all running through my brain, and I had the same experience in other Ferraris with Motor Trend. And I'm speaking about this at length because then I got into Pagani. Super exotic. It's almost ridiculous how far they go. And millions of dollars. It's got those bug eyes. It has its own unique face. It looks kind of crazy. Anytime I've had an opportunity to try one, they're usually pretty diabolical. And I think, okay, they don't have the team of engineers that a larger manufacturer does. They don't have all the time and money to sort these things out, and they're not driven at these speeds much anyway. So I get into Pagani with the most trepidation of any of these cars and go out with it. And I don't like the gearbox. The gearbox is a single clutch, and it doesn't snap them off like the best of the dual clutches do. Although there is a weight advantage to that, I'm told. But it's light. The Pagani is light. And I'm all about light. And I'm kind of sneaking up on this car because it's the most exotic and may have the most outrageous handling. When I start driving the car, and it's not twitchy. It doesn't have an overactive front. It comes in quite nicely. I'm like, wow. The load builds evenly, front and rear, when I roll into a corner. When the car leans, the weight transfers. It's beautifully damped, and the car's compliant. It's not nervous and skipping around. And I'm thinking, this car feels pretty good. This car feels better than the 918. It's 900 pounds lighter or something crazy. I think I like this car. So this is what I do. I've got confidence. I'm driving this thing harder and harder and harder. Go deeper, go deep. The braking, beautiful, perfect effort. Not much, not too little. Bite. The moment you go to the pedal, instant response. That car's slowing down right now. And at the end of the straightaway at Road Atlanta, that's what you want. You're going 180 miles an hour or more in some car with a little tiny 3-point belt. It's funny how at the end of that straightaway, seat belts shrink. That little 3-point belt. It was wonderful to have that kind of braking feel and that braking power. And guess what? That Pagani is one of the best handling cars I've ever driven. It was unbelievable. It seems even better because it was such a surprise. I mean, I get into one of the top Porsches. I expect it to be good. I have a high expectation. Porsche, Ferrari, McLaren, high expectation. You guys should know how to do this. Pagani, I didn't know. I know they were tiny and they're very expensive and they're art cars. Well, guess what? They work. And I didn't worry about the walls. It's $3 million. I didn't worry about the walls. I just couldn't wait to drive it again. And the one thing about that transmission is the harder you drive it, the better it works. It's smart. It reprograms and adapts to your driving. And I got out of it just in awe. And I wanted to meet the team that tuned the suspension on that car, that set up that suspension, because they're my kind of guys. And I want them setting up my next race car. If they would have let me take one home, it would have been that Pagani. It's partially just because of the respect I got for the manufacturer to have done it so right. I was just thrilled with that car, and I still am. If I were to say what I wanted on the way in, which one would be the one that I would want to own? That's the 918 Spyder, the Porsche 918, because I want to drive it. It's a little bit tough, it's like picking between your children. I mean, all four of them is fantastic. But the Pagani was just absurdly amazing, so nice to drive.
They actually paid more for the car than I was paying them. The trek to buying my first supercar, it took a very long time, longer than I really thought it was going to, and it ended up not how I intended, which ultimately led to the best week of my life. It started in January 2018 when I decided I wanted a supercar, and I had in my head, I want a Lamborghini. What Lamborghini can I afford? A Gallardo. Makes sense, so I started looking for them. I find one in Atlanta. It's the right price. The right color, it's the right year, everything's perfect. Call up the dealer. Hey, I'm interested in this car. Can I come take a look at it? Yeah, no problem. I can come down in a few days. Great. Next day I get a phone call. Sorry, car's been sold. It was a consignment car. Okay, no big deal. I got time. A few more weeks go by. Find one in Panama. Already twin turboed. Perfect. Exactly what I want. Like doing half-mile racing. Excellent. Talked to this guy for a while. Hey, the car's going back to underground racing. They've got a Huracan they're building for me. They're taking it in as trade. But if you want it, I'll sell it to you, but it's got to get in the country first. It's not there yet. Okay, no big deal. I can wait on it. It's fine. Send him a deposit so he knows I'm serious. We're good to go. This whole big process. Car's ready to go to the US. It's going to come into Miami. My cousin's going to pick it up from the port. Then we can send it up to Underground Racing. If you want to look at it there before you actually pay me the whole thing for it, they've agreed they'll do an inspection. They'll let you look at it. Everything's perfect. Then we come to find out I can't get it financed if it doesn't have a United States title. So there's a whole process of going from the Panama title to United States title. It's going to get registered in Florida. This turns into a whole big thing that keeps going on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I finally go, this is too much. I can't deal with all this. Will you send me my deposit back? Yep, sure, no problem. He was great about it. Everything worked out fine. So I'm back on the search for another car. Find one in Los Angeles. I like going to Los Angeles. Sounds like a fun trip to me. Call the dealer. Yep, we have it. It's a consignment car. He's supposed to come pick it up Thursday, but since we have an interested buyer, maybe he'll hold off on coming to pick it up. Great. I'll talk to him. Call me back. Yep. If you can get out here soon, it's already here. He'll do that. I will buy a plane ticket today. I'll see you tomorrow. Great. Perfect. 1 hour before I couldn't cancel my flight, I get a phone call. The guy decided he doesn't want to sell the car anymore. Cool. Cancel my flight. I'm going, okay, 3 of these cars have evaded me. I'm not meant to have one of these cars. So I contact a friend of mine in South Carolina and I say, hey, Kevin, you brought up the McLaren MP412C. Why don't you look at those? And I said, no, I want a Lamborghini. And that's where I was stuck on. And then I sent him a message at 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific. It said, hey, Kevin, you know what? Find me one of those McLarens. I think that's what I want. Clearly, these guy orders are not working out. It was not meant to be. I was not meant to have one of these cars. 6 minutes later, I get a message back. Link to this car. You need to buy this car. 300,000 sticker. That is a steal of a price on it. You need to show up tomorrow and buy this car. Okay, but I'm not doing this consignment thing again. I keep getting burned on it. So I wait till the dealership opens at 9 a.m. Give them a call. Yes, we still have the car. Is it a consignment car or is it in your inventory? It's in our inventory. Perfect. I'll see you tomorrow. I'm going to buy a ticket right now and fly over there tomorrow morning. Okay, where are you coming from? South Carolina. Okay, you're serious. Cool. 23 hours later, I'm standing in Los Angeles, waiting for my friend to pick me up to go to the dealership. Drive straight from LAX to Murrieta, California, straight to the dealership, walk in. He knew exactly who I was. Great, we're going perfect. He goes, to really appreciate this car, you got to drive this Superleggera Gallardo. Okay, I'm not going to tell you no. Oh no, go drive this other. Yeah, it's fine. So I drive it and I got beaten up on this thing. They're very, very rough. Couldn't imagine driving that for any amount of time. Then I get in the McLaren and I take the same route. And it was an amazing, eye-opening experience. At this point, I had never driven anything like that before. First time I ever did was on the test drive to buy this thing. And it was mind-blowing fast, and the handling was great, and it was super comfortable. I thought, this is the car. Fill out all the paperwork. Too late in the day for East Coast banking, so I can't wire him money. Have to come back the next morning and do that. Come back the next morning. He says he had people trying to snipe the car out from under me overnight and into the morning because it was the best price on it at the time. Excellent spec car. Everybody wanted it, and he had to turn them away. And I'm like, no, I'm serious kidding. So I was glad he did that. While we're going through all this, I'm going through all the paperwork and wiring money. And then I go, what if it'll come off the price at all? I was like, hey, is there any room in this price? And I got a very firm no. It's like, whoa, okay. Then he showed me why. They actually paid more for the car than I was paying them. They took $1,000 off the price because they drove it 900 miles over 6 months that they had in inventory. The owner of the dealership, that was his daily driver when he was in town. He's a professional race car driver. So in the off season, he was there. That's what he drove while he was waiting on another car. So I took that as I'm not getting anything more off the price. Okay, great. Well, I'm there for the week. I decided if I'm not going to get this car, then I should stay there and find the one that I want. Southern California has tons of exotics. So that's what I need to do. Well, that was the car that I got. So I had a whole week to burn. Worked out everything so I could drive it temporarily in California. And he said, well, what are you going to do with this for the whole week? While you've got this car? I said, I'm going to drive the crap out of it. And he kind of laughed. And I was like, I don't think you realize I was pretty serious when I said I was going to drive the crap out of it. So we drive back to San Clemente, where my friend lived. Then we kind of decided what were we going to do for the week. Well, this is on a Friday when I pick up the car. Saturday, Cars and Coffee, Newport Beach. Perfect place. Haven't been to that one. So I take the car there, and none of my friends know I've purchased this car. My wife at the time also does not know that I've purchased this car. I told her I was going to California for a week. I did not tell her why. So Saturday, I post pictures from Cars and Coffee. My friends think it's a rental, which was kind of funny. And then my wife at the time sees the car and goes, man, that's an excellent looking car. That looks really pretty. And she was really happy that I got this car. She goes, yeah, I kind of thought maybe you were going to go buy a car. And then Sunday, we went to Sunset GT. You have to be one of these exclusive brands to get in there. And we went and did that. And I was like, man, this is the high life of owning a supercar. You get to do these fun events and all this kind of thing. And I posted some more pictures. And as it turns out, my wife found out how much the car cost. And she wasn't quite as happy when she found that out. She thought it cost about a third of what I had actually paid for it. Alas, I'm still gone for several more days, so this does not concern me. I'm having a good time. While I'm at Sunset GT, meet a guy, sees my VIP badge, and he goes, what car have you got? I got the Storm Gray McLaren up there. Well, me and some friends were going to go for a drive in the canyons after this. Do you want to go with us? Total stranger, never met him before. Yeah, we were going to do that. Didn't know how to get there. Perfect, this works out. So his friends all had GT2 RSs, GT3 RSs, 911 Turbo S's. I think there was a Cayman in there. A bunch of Porsche guys. And I just followed with them. Had an amazing drive through all this stuff and met all these new people that were really cool. Most of them live south of LA. So we had to drive down 405 and stuff like that. And everybody decided it was going to be a very spirited drive among all this. And it was quite spirited. I'm glad that some of the footage we have, and I'm glad some of it we don't, because it would be rather incriminating. But I met all these people and had a great drive on those days, and then we had several more days. So what are we going to do? We're going to cruise Rodeo. We're going to go everywhere we can through Beverly Hills and all these fun drives. We just drove it all week long and enjoyed getting the responses from different people that in that area you think would fly under the radar, because there's Lamborghinis and Ferraris and everything all over the place, and they do see those, but what they don't see is those McLarens. So people don't know what it is. It still gets all kinds of attention that I wasn't necessarily wanting, including going to a restaurant that had very, very tall curbs. I mean, they were this tall. You wouldn't want to open a standard car door. It would go straight into it. We go to pull around, and everybody's watching the supercar. And my friend says to me, I hope you can parallel park this, because everyone is watching. And they all were. And I did nail it first try, perfect, worked out, which is great for having a car for 2 days. And then the most funny phenomenon happened. I get out of the car and everybody's looking like, this has got to be somebody important, somebody famous. I got to know who this is. And the closer we walk to the front door, you could see the disappointment on their face of, I don't know who this is. This guy's a nobody. All the way to the point of walking straight through the front door. So it was fun seeing everybody's disappointment on their face. And we did a lot more stuff like that the whole week. And eventually I had to go return the car back to the dealer for them to put it on transport to get it back to my house. Because I didn't want to drive it across the country. I didn't want to plan on that, not knowing ahead of time, do I want to go drive this 2,400 miles home? And the liability of stones and all that kind of stuff. So I had it transported back. But I took it back to him. And at some point, we put race gas in it, and we did launch control and all kinds of fun stuff. And we had mentioned this to him. He goes, do you still have any race gas in there? I said, no, we burn all that off. Oh yeah, that would make sense because you had to drive over here, and you probably put a couple hundred miles on it. If you're hard on it, you only get like 130 miles of the tank. Yeah, it makes sense. I was like, no, we put gas in it 5 times. You left with a full tank of gas. Yeah, I know. And I put 5 tanks of gas in it, and now it's empty. Wait, how did you do that? I said, I put over 900 miles on the car. And that blew his mind that I put 961 miles on a car in 5 days from buying it. And a supercar, no doubt. That just kind of led to what I never expected to happen myself. I thought I'd be a little chill with the mileage. But no, now I bought the car with 16,000 miles. In my first 365 days of ownership, I put over 9,200 miles on it. And upon driving here, I flipped 30,000 miles. and I do all the maintenance myself. Any modifications, I do myself. So now I get to find everything that has to be done in a 30,000 mile maintenance and then make a video about it. Now the transport situation, it didn't go so well. They ended up causing about $4,000 worth of damage, and they operate out of Arizona. I found out that if they don't serve papers in 60 days, they just drop your case. So that whole week, super happy, wife very unhappy, and then it all went downhill from there on the transport, getting the car and dealing with all that. But I still really enjoy the car. It was absolutely the best decision that I've made in an automotive purchase, despite what depreciation might end up happening. But every single mile is absolutely loved.
I was a Nürburgring lap record holder in a McLaren Senna. Going back a few years, I remember my first experience at the Nürburgring Nordschleife. Of course, it is a legendary circuit set in the Eifel Mountains in Germany, not too far from Dusseldorf and Cologne. I think pretty much everybody into automotive and motorsport has some experience there at some point in their lifetime driving. It is such an iconic place, the most challenging and dangerous circuit pretty much anywhere in the world, both due to its length, the blind corners, the surprises, but also famously the Touristenfahrten days, the tourist drive days, where, well, pretty much anybody, whether it's a coach, a bus, any kind of vehicle, can basically buy a ticket, head on out and complete a lap. That doesn't mean you have to watch out, and my first time I ever did it was a good time to go. Perhaps I would have been more sensible with hindsight and driven in a very, let's say, easily replaceable car were anything to happen, but at the time I was in Germany with my McLaren MP4 12C, and I popped down to a local kind of tuition school, and we went out for a few laps, and the track had opened before its scheduled time, so it was basically empty, and I had the track more or less to myself to go out and do 2 or 3 laps in total. But pretty much from that point, I kind of got the bug for it and knew I was going to end up going back. And I'm not like a seasoned professional, I don't go for lap times in particular when I'm at the track. But I like to go, I like to drive it and get a feel for it. And of course now I've done a lot more laps, maybe at this point something like 50 or so. So I've driven it a fair few times. I know my lefts and rights around the track and I know where it's going. I would go back every couple of months. I went back and just did a little bit more and a little bit more. Last year, I arranged a trip where I took 4 of my cars over to the Nordschleife, a driving tour from London via Paris, and I took a few of my friends and team members, the guys helping me create some of the content that I'm making. So we took my McLaren 675 LT Spider, my Aston Martin Vantage GT8, my fairly recently acquired Mercedes AMG GTR, and my brand new 2-day-old Porsche 911 GT3. So I just picked it up from having paint protection film installed, and the first time I was driving it, its maiden journey was to head over to the Nürburgring Nordschleife, which seemed like the appropriate thing to do with a Porsche 911 GT product. GT3, its natural habitat, is out on the Nürburgring. So we drove over with the 4 cars on that trip. I had this idea, but I hadn't committed to it because I didn't want everyone to get too excited, that if we felt the track was empty enough, we would take all 4 cars out together and go for some laps. Just to have some fun, enjoy it all, let everybody drive the cars. But this was on the Easter weekend, and the Easter weekend at the Nürburgring becomes very busy. A lot of people head there, a lot of people want to go out to do some laps, and even more people go to spectate. So the traffic jams are chaotic to get around, and it's very busy, both on track and off. But we did some laps, it was an amazing time, everybody had a great trip, we brought the cars home safely, and that's always, I think, the biggest sigh of relief when you get back. But it built me up again because I knew that I had my Ford GT coming and my McLaren Senna coming, to thinking, would I do this again with those? Were those cars that I could sensibly take around the track? And I've always been pretty good at it. I've never had any moments. I've always taken it, safely, been in control, because I think the most important thing is to have an amazing time, but bring it back home at the end. You don't want it's no fun if it goes wrong. It racks up a very big bill very quickly. So the Ford GT arrived. That car I actually took over first. About a week before the Easter weekend earlier this year, I came to the ring with my Ford GT that had been at an event in the Netherlands the day before, so we had driven it down, got to the Nürburgring, and woke up in the morning intending to go out and do some laps. And I think at this point only maybe 2 or 3 Ford GTs had ever gone around before, one of which was a factory car, so it's not exactly a common kind of thing to see a Ford GT there on the ring. I wake up, I'm staying in a hotel that's trackside, I go and open the curtains, and we're talking spring, I look outside and it's a blanket of snow. The entire area is completely white. So immediately I'm like, this isn't going to work. But we think, let's kill some time, let's go do some photos and, make a photo shoot out of it, because who doesn't like seeing a supercar on a snowy background? And the road had dried a bit, so it was safe, even though I had my Michelin Sport Cup 2 tyres on, which are a summer tyre, a track-focused tyre. So we did some photos, and it was warming up pretty quickly. So although obviously at this point the track was closed, we were looking at the weather forecast that was saying it was going to be quite significantly above freezing later in the day. So hung around in the hope that I'd be able to, do some laps. Fortunately, it all dried and the track cleared and there was a possibility to go and drive. So I did a few laps in the Ford GT. Firstly, popping it into track mode, which on the GT drops it by about 2 inches, 5 centimeters or so, but very aware that when I would get to the famous carousel, the carousel corner where you have an uneven surface, there was no way I'd get around that in track mode without cracking the splitter. I'd watched Ford doing some laps with their own press cars, and somebody had filmed it from the outside, and I had heard the noises of it crunching as it goes around, and the underbody's all carbon fiber, so that wasn't really my thing. So I had to go around the outside of carousel, but it worked perfectly. I had an amazing time and got to experience, the Ford GT on the Nürburgring Nordschleife. But that was kind of the first step, because the next week the intention was to return on the Easter weekend, despite the crowds and chaos, to take the Senna around the ring. And at this point, no McLaren Senna, not even a factory car, had ever completed a lap of the Nordschleife. That meant mine was going to be the first, and it would mean if I made it back, for a brief period, it would be the Senna lap record holder. So what did we do? We went out, drove out with a friend who works there and has done many laps and has a lot of experience. Drove it round, got addicted, drove it round again and again and again, took the GT out and drove the cars exactly as they were built and ever intended to do so. And of course that did mean that at the end of the day, technically, for a brief period, I was a Nürburgring lap record holder in a McLaren Senna. And to be honest, I might still be. A friend of mine has done one lap at the ring since. But basically, this car, I would be pretty sure if McLaren had a driver that they wanted to put in and the conditions were all set and right, the Senna would be, it would break the record for a production road car. I'm absolutely sure of it. When you see the times, and of course at the minute, I think technically the record holder is the Manthey Racing GT2 RS, a time of about 6 minutes 42. The production record from a factory is the Lamborghini Aventador SVJ at about a few seconds behind that. So the Senna, from experience at other tracks, would easily be able to pick those two to the post. So having technically taken what would be the fastest car if they set a lap time, and being the first to do it, was quite a special experience. Of course, the thing about Tourist and Fahrten days at the Nordschleife is that it is totally forbidden to time your laps. So you can't officially ever run a stopwatch or a clock or a lap time or anything like that. It's supposed to be a tourist drive, not a racetrack. There are track days when you can go out and do that, and of course for lap record attempts they actually arrange the whole track to be closed down with official timing gear to ensure that it's done fairly between each different manufacturer. Of course there have been many stories about this and people pushing the rules to set the best times they could. So although I don't have an official concrete time that I could tell you was my fastest lap, I'm sure that feeling the performance of the Senna and knowing what I've been able to do around there in other cars, we are definitely talking for sub 8 minutes for sure. That's all I'm happy to say here. But I think the car has something close to a 6.5 in it if it was ever done completely properly through all of those corners around the track. But the Senna, just with its amount of downforce, is a car with 800 kilos of downforce, active aero, the rear wing that's always moving around, active flaps inside the front bumper as well. The car being so lightweight with 800 horsepower as well, just completely on it. And with a level of control that I've never experienced as well. It's so close to a race car, a GT3 car or a GTE car or something of that level, that when you're going around a corner past traffic and on the Nordschleife, because it's a public road, it's a toll road, you've bought your ticket, but that's paying the toll, you have to obey normal road rules. So if you're overtaking, you overtake on the left. The traffic has to stay to the right, which means sometimes if you're in the faster car, depending which way the corner goes, you're overtaking on the outside or the inside or wherever it may be. But the beautiful thing with the Senna, with so much grip available and such braking power, is that you can pretty much anywhere on the track get past anybody in any circumstance. It would take, I think, somebody driving a car like a Performante or a GT2 RS at a very fast rate of speed to actually impede your progress when you're in the Senna. You can just take it on the outside curbs, cruise on around, no problems. The car just grips and sticks, and around you go. Truly fascinating experience, actually, to drive it hard. There is definitely an element, though, that you shouldn't learn to drive a track like the Nürburgring in a high-performance car, because it can easily go wrong. I've had many laps where it's yellow flagged and you drive past a car that's in the barrier when the track gets red flagged because there's been a major accident. And you always have to be aware as well that it could not necessarily be your fault. Cars are pushing hard. Sometimes they dump fluids and coolant. Sometimes you're then the victim sliding over that. Other times there are inexperienced drivers who aren't familiar with the racetrack. It's not a track day. It's not a place where people have had, a briefing before, they've been instructed, they know how everything works. It's kind of you've got to rely on everybody knowing what's going on. And if it goes wrong, God forbid, it can go very wrong very, very, very quickly, as I'm sure everybody has probably seen before. So taking both the Senna and the Ford GT around definitely took me some thinking and careful planning and being willing to bail out on if I felt it wasn't going to work. But the conditions were right, it was dry, it wasn't too busy for any of my runs, and I felt confident and went out for my laps, brought the cars home, and some very good memories came of it. The policeman just kicks the side of my car. Back when I was at school, I was fascinated by the Gumball 3000. How you had these rallies taking the most incredible supercars, very long distances, this lifestyle holiday road trip kind of vibe, celebrities, incredible supercars, hypercars, whatever it was that was taking part. So I was always really interested in what was going on. And when I was in my teenage years, before getting my driving license, before having the ability to drive myself, you have to be 17 in the UK, I was actually trying to follow my cousin, who at the time was taking part. He did a couple of Gumball 3000 rallies, and I was always looking for the updates, but this was in an era pre-social media. It wasn't so easy to actually find out what was going on, particularly the rallies over here in the United States, and even the ones in Europe, to be honest. It wasn't like you could just go to Instagram or Facebook or even YouTube and get the latest updates. So I was always following forums, trying to figure it out. The pictures were coming in behind real time, a few days later, and there wasn't really that much out there. And this is one of the places I started my YouTube channel, was when the Gumball 3000 came to London in 2010, started in London. I went down, made some videos, and again, basically every year since then. There is only 1 year that I haven't covered in the 10 rallies that have taken place since I started my YouTube channel. And that was due to an event clash with something else that I was actually taking part in and attending. Then the first rally I took part in myself was in 2012. It was a coast-to-coast rally running from New York all the way to Los Angeles. An amazing experience. I was invited by a team to take part and make some videos of the adventure. The following year, I would kind of turn up and just see what happened, going from Copenhagen around through Russia down to Monaco, and I joined Josh Cartou's team at the time and made some videos as we went and got a feel for this, taking my R8 Spider, not officially on the rally, but driving the same route, following it all the way through. Then the next year was my first official rally with my own car. It was Miami to Ibiza. We had the first legs in the United States, going from Miami up to Atlanta, then up to New York. 2 incredibly long days that I did in my friend's Nissan GTR. Now I will point out there were 3 of us in this Nissan GTR, and that was rather intense. 15 hours each, 2 days in a row, 2 days consecutively, with pretty much me being the smallest person there in the car, sitting in the back. And if you've ever seen the back of a Nissan GTR, 2 problems. Not exactly much legroom, and the window right above your head, which with the heat in, I think it was May or June of that year, was not ideal. It was a bit of a greenhouse back there. You couldn't really sleep very much, and it wasn't very comfortable. So this was pretty intense. Then we had the flight, Gumball Air, where all the cars are loaded up into some cargo planes. We flew from New York to Glasgow Prestwick in Scotland, come off the passenger plane, all the cars are being unloaded from the cargo planes, and the journey continues. So you've just had a very long drive in North America, an overnight flight, and then you've got a very long drive down towards London. This year's rally was hard work. A lot of fun, but exhausting, completely and totally exhausting. So we went from Glasgow to Edinburgh all the way down to London on that same day. And the next day we went from London to Paris. That was a shorter drive, fortunately. But the next day was going to be the long, long slog. Paris to Barcelona. So if you think about this, we've got probably, I'm not sure exactly, but let's say 1,000 kilometers, 600, 700 miles or something to go. A hot, warm day, not particularly the most exciting day. It was pouring with rain the day before. This day was just French autoroutes, police checkpoints non-stop the entire way. So you can't really get away with having too much fun, we could say. You've just got to kind of cruise on down. We had various stretches, driving in convoy with lots of different cars, 10 cars in a group, all that kind of thing that make you feel part of the rally, a fantastic environment. But then, and I'm driving, I should say, for the European legs in my McLaren 12C. So we had flown over. My brother actually had brought my car up to Scotland to be ready for us to arrive, because it was too complicated for me at the time. I was in over my head trying to get a car to the US. I just couldn't deal with that, the paperwork, the expense. It was all far too far. So we had my car, my McLaren 12C. That I would say was my first supercar. You know, my pride and joy. My only car. I had I think a run around back home, but the 12C was everything to me. A car I used for basically every kind of drive, all the activities, anything I would do involving cars. So we got on this road trip, heading down towards Barcelona. And when you get to the end of a leg, particularly day 5 of 6, where you're tired, everybody has been dealing with problems, getting over different things, and you encounter a stressful situation, everything exaggerates. I'm sure everybody can relate to exactly what I mean by that. It's just a human being response. So we're arriving in Barcelona. The crowds are huge. There are so many people there. We're staying at a hotel just in the harbour area. So there's this whole setup, this whole arrival road lined with loads of people on both sides. Everybody cheering, shouting to rev it, wanting to get t-shirts and stickers and whatever freebies you've got. And I'm doing this rally with Team Wolfpack. So I joined Team Wolfpack, who had 4 or 5 cars. And at this moment, for the arrival, we had kind of staged it. We'd make some cool videos. I would go up front, I'd have my cameras filming backwards, and we'd see all of the cars, you know, pulling in through the crowds and just get all of the atmosphere on video. So we all arrived, you know, at the same kind of time, and you had this junction, a really big, really chaotic junction, because you had to turn from the right side of the road left, which of course means that you're waiting for oncoming traffic, and therefore the cars are kind of held and parked there for a decent amount of time before they can actually enter the crowd and drive through. As a result of that, people kind of flock out and come around the junction, are all just being part of, you know, getting the photos, being part of it, trying to come up to drivers. You have some celebrity drivers, so obviously the crowd are looking for who's in which car. What basically happened next is the police kind of arrived, and the police are dealing with crowds, they're dealing with gumballers. It's hot, they're not in the best mood, they're in their full uniform, they've got their kind of steel-capped boots, and I found myself in this unfortunate position that I was at the front, waiting to turn left across the junction, and a policeman, he shouted something at me in Spanish. Of course, I'm in Spain, but I don't personally speak any Spanish, so I have no clue what he said. So I think I just looked a little bit blank. I certainly didn't have any rude reaction or anything, just blank and unaware of what I was being told to do. And the next thing I know, looking across to my left from my right-hand drive car, looking in the mirror, the policeman just kicks the side of my car. With his boots on, he just kicks the side of my McLaren 12C. And I'm in complete shock. I want to get out and, you know, what's just happened? Why? What did I do? But he's screaming at me, he's waving, and more policemen are coming over. So all we can do is quickly get out of there and moved away. We actually turned kind of right to get across the junction the other way. The whole team, because everybody behind had obviously seen what had happened. And nobody, you know, we're driving with Ferraris, with McLarens, with Lamborghinis. Nobody wants that to happen. So we get out, we head around just up the road towards the other side, and we all pull over, hazards on, and, you know, we're like, what just happened? We have to go that way. And the police know we're going that way, because, you know, that's where all the gumball cars are headed. And then they start coming over. And we're like, oh, back in the car, let's go. We've not done anything wrong. We don't think we've done anything wrong. But it's just this whole, like, we've got to get out of here and take a whole long route round to get back towards the start of the grid to then actually head down, which turned out to be amazing. The crowd and the reception in Barcelona, when these kind of events come through Spain, they are unreal. They get in the atmosphere. They're just attitudes towards it all are completely on a different level. And it's a really, really cool place to be. But I'm now in this mixed emotions of I've just been immensely stressed. I don't know if my car is damaged because I haven't been able to inspect it or work it out. We've got wraps on with multiple layers of vinyl, so I'm hoping underneath it's going to be okay. I can just see these kind of smear marks from the boot along the side of the car. And then it's all of a sudden into the commotion and chaos of the rally grid where you've got people standing on cars that are moving down, you've got the crowds cheering, you've got a million photos, and everything's going on literally all at the same time. And, well, I think you get the point that it was pretty crazy. The emotions that came from this when it was my first supercar, my first full Gumball 3000, heated and exhausted from the days that had come. Day 5 of the rally, all just came together. It was panic. It was just, what's happened? Is it okay? And of course, later on, we continued the rally. Still, I think even then, just said to myself, right, let's go inside and deal with this another time. It's all a bit too much for right now. And then the next day, we went to Ibiza, where the final day we finished on the island. We had a ferry over, got to the island, sat down, had more opportunity to look at it, start peeling back some of the stickers. The car underneath, thankfully, is completely fine, but emotion overload at the time. Now, that was my first rally, my first McLaren. Have gone on to own, very fortunately, a few more McLarens since. I've also done the Gumball 3000 every year, basically bar one in terms of the full rally since then as well. It's an event I truly, truly love. But that was certainly a moment that stood out to me just for the sheer levels of drama and emotion that were all happening at exactly the same time.
So I'm losing a lot of money, as you can see. I'm back. Lost about 5 pounds and $50,000. So, the favorite video of my last visit was talking about how unshrewd of a negotiator I am compared to Ed, which I'm here visiting him in Atlanta because I drove up with my latest purchase, a Ferrari 348, which I bought for $35,000. It has almost 100,000 miles on it, and when I told Ed this, he gave a polite little nod, but in his head, he was thinking, should have been shrewder. I should have, but I just can't help myself. So I figured I would give an update on all of my unshrewd purchases because I am the least shrewd negotiator ever. I buy terrible cars and overpay for them because that's what the people of YouTube want me to do. So let's get started here. I've made a list. Actually, I'm going to start with one reasonable purchase I made. It was a Mazda Miata, 1990 with 32,000 miles. I bought it for $5,600, which, hey, Ed's giving the nod of approval. It's a mint Mazda Miata. I made a video about it. It's the 30th anniversary of the Miata. I thought this is the perfect occasion to have the nicest one ever. Worst video I've made, views-wise, in 2 years. People do not want to see me succeed and buy nice cars. They want to see me buy junk. So that's what I continue to do. Starting with, well, it wasn't really junk. This was a reasonable purchase, I think. It was a Tesla Model S, a 2012. Had 100,000 miles on it, though. I paid $33,000 for it. It's making the ooh face, yes. Well, this was a little while ago. I mean, Tesla still had their little bit of value. The original owner that I bought it from, his son was a VP at Tesla. He was in charge of engineering. He's proud of his son, so he bought the car. He had the motor replaced twice. It was the original battery. It was a very well taken care of car, but I was hoping it was going to be a little less reliable, a little more video worthy. But the only thing that really happened was I let my wife drive it, and she complained all the time how she was going to run out of charge going 5 miles down the road because range anxiety. So we switched out of that when I lost only $3,000, so that's not bad. But we'll go true to form because after that I bought a McLaren, 2012 McLaren MP412C, and I bought this car out of New Jersey from an individual who said, well, before I sell it to you, why don't I take it to the dealer because I'm hearing a weird noise from the transmission, and I have a full warranty on this car, so no matter what, it'll get taken care of, but let's get this figured out before I transfer the warranty over to you so there's no trouble. Okay, great. He takes it over there. I fly out to see the car to seal the deal. I figured I could test drive the car, but I get there and he says, well, this little transmission noise, it turns out they need to replace the transmission. And you can't really drive the car because in order for them to get the warranty approval, they had to drain the fluid out of the transmission to see if there was any stuff in it and do their diagnosis, and they didn't put the fluid back in. So it only goes forward in one gear and will not shift. Normally someone would back out of a deal. You can't test drive a McLaren, but I was kind of like, well, this is kind of interesting. This is fun. So yeah, we'll do it. And they said it will be done in a few weeks. But it turns out there's a national shortage of transmissions. So I didn't see the car for over 2 months. I think it was almost 3 months. So I bought a $105,000 McLaren, and I didn't get to drive it or do anything for 3 months. This guy was dancing all the way down to the Porsche dealer where he bought a GT3. He actually, in the 2 years he owned it, it paid out over $100,000 in warranty repairs. This was its third transmission. It was on its second engine. The iris screen, which is its infotainment screen, had failed. So many things. These McLarens are not known for their reliability, and they're not known for holding their values. So I finally get the car. I have it for a little while. It breaks. Fine, I have a warranty. He was actually kind enough to buy an extra year of warranty for me. But the problem with me living in Wichita, Kansas is there's no McLaren dealer in Wichita. There's really not much in Wichita. So the closest dealer would have been Dallas, I think, St. Louis, but it was a minor enough issue that I decided to ship it down to Amelia Island for the car festivities there, and then drive it to Atlanta and leave it to have these issues addressed. And they did a great job, but I was without the car for a month, and I'm going to deal with shipping. And every time that this happened, it was shipping a car, and then I don't see it for a long time. I have this thing financed, the payment's over $1,000 a month, and yet I can't enjoy this car. Before the McLaren, my biggest mistake ever was buying the Bentley Continental GT, which I bought at a dealer auction for $30,000, and I thought I could get a post-sale inspection. That was the big thing, but it turned out exotics are exempt from post-sale inspections, which I didn't realize, and then I was stuck buying the car anyway. Got here, total absolute disaster. I ended up selling it to Tavares for $12,000, which apparently that was still too much because a year later it's in pieces and he's disgusted with it because it was in Russia for 10 years and all rusted out and had double the miles or triple the miles of what's on the odometer. But that $18,000 loss or whatever it was, McLaren just kicked a hole in that, and that is the new winner of my biggest fail. So after 6 months, I'm just like, this isn't the supercar ownership that I want. So I traded the car for a very low mileage, just perfect Lamborghini Gallardo with the gated manual, much slower. It has like a 4.6 second 0 to 60 versus the McLaren was a 2.9. Just a dinosaur in comparison, but I love that car. Pretty much anybody can work on it. It has Volkswagen diagnostic software in there, but the trade, yeah, $105,000 is what I paid for the McLaren. I traded it in on paper, said $78,000 after 6 months. 6 months. Basically, I'd put $20,000 down, and then the payments that I made over that 6 months meant I was barely not upside down in the payments. So back true to form there, but I think I got a great deal on the Gallardo. Probably when I tell Ed off camera how much I paid for it, he'll fall back in his chair. But I thought it was a decent enough deal, but I was just thrilled to get out of that McLaren. And when I made a video on this Gallardo, I saw in the comment section that no, it is not the prostitute's Lamborghini Gallardo, even though there's the same color combination and everything. It wasn't her car. Hers wasn't a gated manual. It was E-Gear. But I wonder where that car is. So after making that McLaren purchase, I went and bought something equally reliable, a 2007 BMW M5 with the SMG gearbox. I bought it with a failing SMG gearbox for $4,500, and that's not bad, a little over 100,000 miles. It was an unusual color of red that made it kind of special, but I had no idea what I was in for. It is the most unreliable BMW has ever made, and that's really saying something with BMW. They've had a lot of doozies over the years. But this SMG transmission, boy, oh boy, was that expensive. Finding that used, even that was expensive. And then there's the other ticking time bombs to take care of. The rod bearings can fail on the bottom end. And then the Vanos pump can fail at any moment, and that would completely grenade your engine and total the car. So once I had gone through and fixed the transmission and all the other things that were neglected and wrong with this thing, I realized I'm still driving a ticking time bomb, so I need to sell it as quickly as possible. At this point, I'm $13,000 or $14,000 into it. Here's the weird thing about these videos. You would think that people would be terrified to buy these cars based on my experience with them. But when I make these cars and talk about how horrible they are and all the terrible stuff I go through, I get emails constantly from people wanting to buy these cars from me. Endless amount of emails. If I go look up M5, I'll have 50 emails from people saying, hey, I want to buy this car from you when it's done, even though it's a disaster, it's a ticking time bomb. But usually that's how I end up selling cars now. And that included this guy from Dallas who sold his manual transmission E39 M5, which is a fantastic car, and wanted to get into this, which, are you nuts? But I'm okay, you want to buy the car? I think I sold it to him for around $11,000, $12,000, which is a $3,000 loss. Not obscene, but considering the amount of time and effort I put into this car to try and get it going, it really wasn't worth my time. So that wasn't a big hit. 76 Eldorado that I purchased wasn't a huge hit either. I bought it at a Mecum auction knowing it had been sitting for a long time and had to go through, and it just started leaking from everywhere. It's an old 70s car. They leaked when they were new. The quality wasn't the best then. Bought it for $6,500 with fees. That put it over $8,000. In reality, it was probably only worth $3,000, but I paid double that at the auction because I'm an idiot, and then the fees, and then another at least $3,000 or $4,000 sorting it out. Somehow I got somebody to pay $6,000 for this thing when it was all said and done. I'd fixed the cracked bumpers, you know, where the bumper fillers, they all crack over time. I'd fixed that. I spent a lot of money on this thing, making it nice to just get half my money back out of it because I realized it was an old boat that really didn't drive all that well, and it was very comfortable, but it was just a little too new, I guess. As far as the golden era of those giant land yachts, it really goes back to the 60s, which I'll get to that car in a little bit, what I bought to replace it. But we'll move on to the Prius, my Fast and Furious Prius, a 2005 Prius I bought with a dead hybrid battery for $1,500. Not bad. I was able to fix the battery for $1,000. An outfit out of California sent me a rebuilt unit for free, so I was able to put in a new battery myself, and I was in it. Nothing, $1,500 Prius that went down the road. Perfect, great. That's a $3,000 or $4,000 car if I sold it right then and there. Except I can't make money on a car. I had to do something, and that something was making it into a screen-accurate Fast and Furious replica, except it's a Prius. So the orange paint, I didn't wrap it, I painted it, did the pull my finger sticker down the side, I did the spoiler, I did the interior with the TV screens, and I even did nitrous. And what happens when you put nitrous in a Prius? Well, you hit the button and the engine explodes in seconds. So I hit the button, it shoots 3 holes into the block, completely destroys it. At this point, most people would junk their Prius, except I fixed it, so I spent another $2,000 putting in a used engine. At this point, I'm well over $10,000 into this Prius, and I get an email from Daily Driven Exotics because they see the car. They saw the video of me blowing it up and fixing it. And they said, hey, we want to buy this car and then pick up some Fast and Furious cast members and go around to all the filming locations in California. And we'll give you $3,000 for it. And just the fact that, well, that's probably all it was worth, and that's such a great story. I did it, and now the thing's living in California. I guess it's being used by Raymond, who drives for Uber. And they made that video of Hector and Jesse driving around in my Prius to all the filming locations of Fast and Furious. So a $7,000 loss on a Prius, which I tried really hard to do that. And then there was a car that I didn't sell. I gave it away, my 2007 Maserati Quattroporte. I bought it for $8,800. I spent, maybe $3 or $4 grand fixing it. Had to take it up to the Maserati dealer for programming and some other things once we put in some components like some transmission bits. Weird. I got the only Maserati with a good transmission that had issues with the transmission. Go figure. But I decided I'd be really smart with this one and give it away. I gave it away like a typical YouTuber. Put your hand on the car, and the last person to have their hand on the car wins. These videos blow up on the internet. They do great. But I happened to post mine on the day that a YouTube algorithm changed, and it completely tanked the video. It was at the bottom of the list of the last 10 videos that I made, and it took a long time for that video to recover, but still, if you don't get those big views early on, then chances are you're not going to get it later. So unfortunately, that video, made me a few $1,000s on a car that I was $13,000 into. There's no reason why it shouldn't have done more, so it ended up being a really stupid decision. So I'm losing a lot of money, as you can see, and I decided, well, we can switch things up a little bit. Maybe I'll start trading cars. Trading's quite an idea. And the first car that I traded this year was my 2007 Mercedes E63 wagon. This is a very rare station wagon. It was also a super unusual color. It was green, 500 horsepower in a big Mercedes wagon, super fast. But it had 210,000 miles on it, still had loads of service history. I flew out to New York, tried to drive it home, but it broke down on the way home. And then when I finally got that fixed, it was $1,300 to fix the thing that broke. It was a computer, plenty of other things to do. I spent $4,000 on that car after buying it for $13,000, and it kept breaking. So I finally got sick of it, and I was on Facebook, on the Radwood Facebook group, and a guy posted his Bentley Turbo R saying, well, just curious if anybody would want to trade anything for my Bentley Turbo R, 70,000 miles. I jokingly posted the picture of me doing a selfie with the E63 going on the flatbed and said, how about an E63 wagon? And he said yes, which I didn't expect. We got on the phone, and before I knew it, I was trading my E63 wagon that I just spent over $4,000 sorting out, but was so disgusted with it. I had a bad taste in my mouth because it just kept breaking. I was trading it for a Bentley Turbo R cross-country sight unseen, no pre-purchase inspection, and wondering, why is this guy doing this? Because he knows my E63 is awful. And it turns out, well, it gets here. Now I know why he's doing this, because this thing oozes class. It is just beautiful, just oozing, just fine British, just Britishness. The wood, the leather, the smells, everything. It's also oozing mineral oil everywhere. This mineral oil system that controls the brakes and the suspension, pour it in, it leaks out. It's gone. So I just got the estimate on that. It's going to be $5,000 to sort that car out. And then I'm sure once I start driving it, it'll be the next round of things to go wrong with it. So I traded my sorted E63 for a very broken Bentley. I had $17,000 in the E63. It was probably only worth about the $13,000 that I paid for it. And a nice Bentley Turbo R is $25,000. So if you take that 17 plus 5, $22,000 for an average driver quality Bentley Turbo R that's just going to keep breaking. But I could have bought a nice one. You'd think I'd learn my lesson there with trades, except I got an email from a guy wanting to buy my 66 Chrysler Imperial, which I had bought earlier this year after being on Jay Leno's Garage TV show and seeing his Imperials and him encouraging me to buy this Imperial in California that I was looking at. So it had a great story, personal story with me, a memento from a crazy occasion. Why would I ever sell this thing? And I got emails like I always do, people wanting to buy this thing from me, but I didn't want to do it until this guy emailed me and said, hey, I will give you cash and 2 Cadillac Elantes. Not one, but 2 Cadillac Elantes. Okay, this is too funny not to explore. So he initially offered $18,000 plus 2 Cadillac Elantes. I'd paid $22,000 for the Imperial, and I don't know what I was thinking, but I said, okay, well, how about I'll do it for 20, thinking, oh, he won't say $20,000. He agreed. So I traded my Imperial that I paid $22,000 for, spent $2,000 or $3,000 fixing it, for $20,000, so $4,000 or $5,000 loss, and 2 basically worthless Cadillac Elantes. Both of them have the North Star engine too to top it off. So really, I am a total moron. But there is a method to my madness because, as you saw, when I buy a normal car, the videos do terrible. I make no money, but the more stupid I am, the better the videos do, and the more money I make on YouTube. So I'm in this vicious cycle forever of just being an idiot. I'm just a pig in filth and loving it. Loving it. I'm just gonna keep going as long as it lasts.
And what was underneath was extremely ugly and horrifying. So a little while back, I realized that I needed a McLaren in my life. And McLaren had been this car company that I always revered because McLaren F1 was my favorite car, just as well as it was a lot of people's favorite cars. I couldn't afford a McLaren F1 because those cars are $20 million now. Now, my second favorite McLaren is the P1, and the P1 is also an unobtainium car, and that is many millions of dollars. I couldn't afford that. But the third favorite McLaren was a 675 LT, and while that car right now is around $225,000 to $250,000 on the used market, there was one that I perhaps could afford, and that was one that had been crashed in the front and back and had been going through various salvage auctions for the past 3 years. It was a 2016 Delta Red McLaren 675 LT, and this was one of those cars that you see on eBay or Auto Trader or something, and it's like they have a easy fix in the description. Oh, it just needs a fender and a bumper and you'll be fine. It didn't run and drive, but it was probably because of a battery. The AC just needs to be recharged, that sort of thing. Really easy to work on, really easy to repair. Turns out that's not the case. So I bought a 675 LT for $80,000, which is a big discount from what they are used, but there's a reason for that. Because this car had frame damage in the front and the back. It had engine damage, it had cosmetic damage, had a whole lot of cosmetic damage, and boy are those parts not cheap, and boy are those parts not easy to find. The 675 LT, for those that don't know, is basically a 650S with every little bit being a little bit better. It was a track-focused, mostly carbon fiber body with more power, less weight. It was the send-off to that chassis. The MP412C 650S ended in the 675 LT. That was the top version and the last version before they went to the 720. I really loved the look of that car. I loved the lines. I thought it was a very, very good design. And I loved the back end because it was a little bit wider than the 650S and it had a proprietary rear end with a big wing. I mean, they called it LT for a long tail. It was only, I think, like 2 inches longer, but ask any woman, 2 inches makes a difference. So if you look at the car from a design perspective, it was exactly the same as a 650S. However, if you look at the car when you're actually trying to buy parts, that was a completely different thing. The 675 LT, they only made 500 in the world, 500 coupes and then 500 spiders. So you have a really rare car on your hands, and when you have as much damage as you had on mine, you start to run into issues. So before I got into the project, I was looking at this car for years. At first, it went up for auction about 3 years ago, and it went up for auction and it sold for $126,000, which was good money 3 years ago. I mean, the car would have been almost new. And then it went up for auction again, and it sold for $100,000. Then it sold for $90,000. Then it sold for $80,000. Then it sold for $80,000 again to me. And the reason why it sold so many times is because people thought that this car just needed bumpers, maybe an alignment, maybe some new wheels, and maybe some cosmetic repairs, and then it would be good to sell to the next unsuspecting buyer. But that's not the case. This car needed a lot of structural components, not only structural in the metal in the front and back, but the carbon tub. And the carbon tub is a expensive component and not something that you could fix easily, well, not traditionally. So when I got this car, I had to take everything apart. I took off all the carbon fenders, the rear quarter panels, the front end, the rear end, and it allowed me to see what was actually underneath, and what was underneath was extremely ugly and horrifying. So the way this car became so damaged was back in 2017, this car went across a few lanes in Chicago on an October night, and then it went into a tree backwards, and then it rode up onto the curb, which destroyed the bumper and also destroyed part of the suspension, because this suspension has this really high-strung, high-pressure system, and one of the accumulators on top of the strut exploded. That must have been scary. 2,000 PSI just exploding right in front of you, and it ripped apart part of the front fender. So when I got the car all taken apart, I realized that the rear subframe, essentially the rear frame that holds the engine in place, that was just twisted in, so it was narrower than it should have been, and it also was like kind of off kilter, so the wheels weren't exactly where you left them from the factory. And in the front, I thought that everything was okay. I thought that it was only body damage. You know, you get a new front bumper. Not so, because the subframe on one end was a 1/4 inch higher than the other end. So I needed a new subframe, I needed a new rear frame, and the engine had been punted by that tree, had been ripped off its mounts and punted into the gas tank. And that caused damage to the engine mounting, that caused damage to the turbo, that caused damage to the gas tank. Everything needed rebuilding. So from that point, I decided that this car is going to get taken down to its last nut and bolt. This is going to be a rebuild like you would get at a McLaren factory if this thing was new. So I decided to take it down to the carbon tub, which meant taking out the engine. Engine comes out through the bottom, taking out the subframe just comes out with 6 bolts from the carbon tub. The subframe at the front, which involves taking out all the steering components, taking out the brakes, the suspension, all that stuff, and then hopefully remembering how it all goes back together at the end. I also took out the doors. One of the doors was completely messed up, and taking out the roof. And fun fact, the roof, the doors, the quarter panels, all that stuff is glued on from McLaren. It's not bolted on, it is glued on. You just need a heat gun and like a little spatula or a butter knife, and you can take the entire car apart. It takes a very long time and it's very itchy. You're gonna need gloves. I didn't use gloves because I'm a smart person. And it is something that you can definitely do. The jury is definitely out on whether I can realign it when it has to go back together, but I think if McLaren could do it, I could do it. Now, I took off the roof for another reason, because I want to have a car that's a little bit more, let's say, unique. I want a car that doesn't look like every other 675 LT out there, especially not in America. So I bought a roof that has a roof scoop in it that was brand new from McLaren. Now, McLaren would charge $40,000 for this roof panel. It is this beautiful, like, herringbone carbon fiber, and it's one piece. It glues on into place. It's really easy to install. It is the last roof scoop roof in the world, and it was bought by somebody that was gonna put it on their car but ended up not doing it. So I got that guy to sell me it. I didn't pay $40,000, but it also wasn't cheap. But I figured if I'm going to do a McLaren 675 LT, I'm going to do it my way. So that is on its way here from the UK. So I can put that together. I can put the quarter panels together. I'm going to paint it in a color that I want. It's not going to be a McLaren color because, fun fact, McLaren doesn't allow you to buy their colors. They have to sell it to you for a very large markup, and their colors are just trash. Their paint work is garbage. But this car is going to have custom wheels. It's going to have a custom exhaust. I love the look of the 600 LT with exhaust going at the top. So I'm thinking of doing maybe a custom exhaust that goes both out the top and the back with a valve in between them. So if I want to do party mode and have exhaust spitting flames out the top and perhaps lighting my car on fire, I can do that. Also, I want wheels that look like the McLaren F1 LM. I love those 5-spoke, like, thick wheels. This is a car that I never thought I could afford in a million years. I've been watching people like Shmi 150 with his McLaren 675 LT, and I'm just like dreaming to myself, wouldn't it be nice if I had one? And now I have the chance to really like put one together from the ground up, knowing every nut and bolt was put in at least as good as I could put it in. And I'll have a car, hopefully, that works as well as it did stock.
When I told my wife that I was buying Paris Hilton's car, she got really excited. As much time as I honestly do spend on Auto Tempest each day looking for new cars for sale, over the last few months I've been really happy with the cars that I have. I've been driving them, enjoying them, and I did buy another car for Car Trek 4, which will come out in May, and if you follow me on Instagram, you'll have already seen some previews of that series. We had an absolute blast. But a few weeks ago, just out of the blue, I got a message from Tyler Hoover, and it was a listing for a 2006 Mercedes McLaren SLR that was coming up for sale. And it was in a unique spec, but more significantly than that, based on its previous owner, it was a car that could very justifiably be called the most famous McLaren ever built. And I expected him to be telling me that he was going to go buy this car because both of us have talked about how much we do love the SLR. And in fact, though, he said, no, I can't. I just bought these two Lamborghinis, the Diablo Roadster and the Countach that we've seen on his channel. He said, yeah, I can't buy it right now, but I was thinking about making a video just about how cool the car's history is. And I was like, well, man, I don't think we should let this one get away. I think I'll try to buy it if you're not going to. So it became the perfect opportunity to work on a new sponsor relationship because I wasn't exactly in a position to comfortably buy the car either. And I met Rich Light from Glossit last year on Gold Rush, where I actually spent about 1,000 miles driving another participant's SLR McLaren. And I loved the car. I had an absolute blast. I kind of got to learn what it was like on the real twisty roads and obviously bombing through big highway routes as well. And so Rich had given everybody on the rally some of his gloss enhancer detail spray. And each night we would use that to kind of clean the cars up and wipe the dust that had accumulated from the prior day's driving. And I really came to like it. For somebody who's lazy like me and can get a car clean, once in a while or have somebody help with that, but really just needs a way to keep it looking as good as it possibly can after some long driving. The stuff's really good. It's just a great quick detail spray, easy to get on, easy to get off. And so I really came to like it. And Rich and I had been talking for the last few months about different ways that Glossit and VINwiki might be able to collaborate. And so he hadn't been quick enough to sign up for one of our monthly placements for 2021 on VINwiki, which are already sold out. But when this came up, I called him. I said, hey, I think I have the perfect thing for us to work on. And he said, man, that sounds great. I can make a series detailing the car. And I was kind of surprised at that. He said, no, let me intercept the truck that'll be bringing it to you from Los Angeles. I'll do everything we can to make the car look perfect. And this worked perfectly because I was going to be out filming Car Trek as the car was being shipped. I'll spend a few days with the car and then we'll send it on to you. I said, well, that sounds great. And he ended up doing a 100-hour detail, and he's going to have a series on his YouTube channel kind of documenting everything that they did with the car. But obviously now it is at a point perfectly corrected, perfectly prepared, that I truly can just use this to keep it looking great. And in honor of that relationship and to celebrate it, he has agreed to give any of our viewers a free bottle of their Gloss Enhancer Detail Spray. You just visit them at the link in the description below, sign up, and they'll send you one. All you have to do is pay the shipping and handling. And so it's a great product. There's a lot of good quick detail sprays on the market, but Glossit sells everything that you could possibly need to detail a car. But to be honest, this is exactly the kind of thing that somebody like me needs. So please visit them at the link in the description below, get your free bottle, and thank them for their support of VINwiki. But the car is a 2006 SLR McLaren. It's gray with a tan interior, and I absolutely love it. Of course, the SLR has kind of a strange reputation, and it's gotten criticized by a lot of people for three major things. The handling is strange, the braking is strange, and the transmission is clunky. And all of those criticisms are kind of right, particularly relative to a lot of the cars that it lined up against. Now, when the car came out, the SLR and really all the other supercars of the day weren't called hypercars. That wasn't a word that came up until really late in the 2000s, 2010, and really became more mainstream in 2013 and 14 to describe the 918, the P1, and the LaFerrari. But certainly now we use the word hypercar a lot to talk about Paganis and Koenigseggs and really any ultra-low production, ultra-high performance car. But I think like most enthusiasts, when I heard Richard Hammond refer to the SLR as hypercar royalty when it was drag racing in Abu Dhabi, the LP670 Mercy SV, I kind of looked, I was like, the what? Hypercar royalty? So I don't really think of it as a hypercar. It was most certainly the greatest car that Mercedes and McLaren could come together to build in the mid-2000s. And obviously, I'm a huge fan of cars of the mid-2000s. I always say that I like to look like I won the lottery 10 or 15 years ago, and that's why I own and love the cars that I do. And so this fits in really well because it's one of the cars that would have been shopped heavily against an LP640 when it was new. I love the LP640, but this kind of solves that big, crazy, grand touring, highway bombing car in a different way. You know, those criticisms were somewhat valid. It handles like a Batmobile. The hood is eternally long, the steering feel is a little bit strange, and it feels very much like a German Mercedes-AMG product where they didn't care as much about it feeling as refined. The noises that it makes, everything about the car is just dialed up to 11. The braking is also super duper strange. They're very early generation ceramic brakes, and honestly, they rely on the rear spoiler acting as an air brake to have the car stop the way that you feel like it probably ought to. And also the transmission is weird. It's weird to have a clunky 5-speed automatic transmission with a torque converter in a car that looks, feels, and sounds like an SLR does. However, when we look at owning the cars now and not having an early single clutch sequential manual transmission, which is what it would have had because they were never going to put a stick in this car, I have to say I love it. It's the same transmission that's in the CL55 that we set the Cannonball record in. It's the same transmission that's in the $2,000 S55 that I'm going to shoot off a cliff in Alaska. It's one of those things that it's just such a bulletproof part of the car that when you're trying to own an aging supercar or hypercar, if you want to call it that, that's one of the things that should scare you. It's all these transmissions that were built at the bleeding edge of technology at the time. They're huge ownership liabilities now. And knowing that I can trust the transmission in this car makes me feel a whole lot better about the cost of ownership. Of course, the SLR also has the reputation of having catastrophically high servicing costs, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in future videos, but you know, there's a lot of people that can work on them now, and there's a lot of great dealership infrastructure to try to make it easier to put more miles on the car. Now, this car actually has some miles on it. I think it's the highest mileage SLR that I've ever put hands on. I mean, there are some that have had 30 or 40, 50,000 miles, but this one has 21,000 miles. So it has absolutely been driven, and I'll say it has the best feeling brakes that I've ever been in one. The one that I drove on Gold Rush handled strangely and braked in a really, really strange way, even more so than usual. So this one drives a lot more like my CL55 or an SL55 of the day would brake. And so it hasn't upset me, and I haven't gotten that normal SLR feeling that I'm about to roll into whatever is in front of me, because that's something that you always feel like is going to happen. Again, I love the SLR. I'd always been interested in owning an SLR. I talked a lot about why I like the SLR in the video from Gold Rush last year, and I actually tried to buy one that was in a flood that I got outbid by a guy that sent it to Saudi Arabia. And so I've always thought the car was really, really cool, both in what it stands for McLaren and for Mercedes, and in how you can drive and use the car. It is a daily drivable supercar. And so again, the reason that this one is famous though is not based on anything that applies to all SLRs. It's famous because this one belonged to Paris Hilton. And even more than that, it is the most famous McLaren on earth, I think very justifiably, because of one night that it had. Now, Paris Hilton in the mid-2000s was the hottest thing on earth. She was associated with every pop icon there ever could have been, and she was famous for being on The Simple Life and obviously being an heiress to the Hilton Hotel's fortune, and certainly she was out spending money lavishly, and she was as famous as anybody could have been at that time, particularly for another video that happened one night in her life that she may or may not have wanted to be on the internet, but certainly helped her rise to stardom. And interestingly, when I told my wife that I was buying Paris Hilton's car, she got really excited, like in a very unexpected way. And I was like, "Are you a big Paris Hilton fan?" And then it occurred to me, no, but like Kimmy, my wife was apparently enamored and enthralled with the pink West Coast customized Bentley Continental GT that Paris was very famous for owning. She's like, "You bought the pink Bentley?" I said, no, I did not. I bought her SLR, which interestingly, she was still a little bit excited about because my wife knew that it had a real automatic transmission. And while I've tried to get her comfortable with driving a stick, that's never really worked. And so she was like, "I might want to drive that car." I said, "Well, you are certainly welcome to." Of course, like we said, the handling is weird. The overhang is impossible to know where the nose is at. And so we'll help her be careful with that. But I'm very excited at the prospect that she might want to put some miles on the car. And so again, Paris was at this time associated with everybody who was anybody in Southern California. And one night she went out to some clubs in I think the Beverly Hills Hotel with Britney Spears. And Britney Spears certainly was kind of at those last couple of years before her very public meltdown. And this car, in fact, was in the recent New York Times documentary about her life. This car on that night was certainly going to have an interesting time. And so Paris and Britney have been going out, and at one point, either in getting into or out of the car, Britney Spears manages to flash the entire world by way of 100 paparazzi cameras. And as famous as Gordon Murray or Lewis Hamilton or El Chapo's drug runners might be able to make a McLaren, that all applies to the very narrow niche of automotive enthusiast. This was an international stage, and no matter what they could do, they could never make a car as famous as the unsheathed undercarriage of one pop icon, Britney Spears. And in fact, when you see her get into this car on video, because the whole thing got caught on video, you see her kind of realize what she may have just done. And of course, those pictures took absolutely no time to make their way around the world. And in fact, every single person that I have mentioned that I bought this car claims to have seen those photos. And those photos, particularly the ones later on in the night, where they had gone to some club, they had come out, and the paparazzi were asking Paris about a relationship that she had with Lindsay Lohan, where apparently, according to a podcast that Paris released just last week, they had had some kind of a feud where Lindsay had said perhaps that Paris had hit her or something like that. And they're talking, and Lindsay Lohan just walks up in an unexpected seeming way and ends up just getting into the car. And so she and Britney Spears are both sitting in the passenger seat of this car. Paris is driving, and you have some of the most iconic 2000s photos you could ever imagine. All those photos have been seen everywhere. In fact, they make sunshades of the 3 of them sitting in the car that you can buy for a normal car. I ordered one, it's not here yet, but obviously I have to have one to put into this car. And so I am by no means a fan of popular culture. I'm not even a knower of what popular culture is most days, but this is a car that has been, without question, seen by more people than any other McLaren ever built. And I think that's really cool. Is it enough to make me buy a car that I wasn't necessarily planning to? Sure. Would it have made me buy a car that I didn't already want to? Probably not. There's plenty of celebrity cars that have that interesting backstory that, you know, you could say that about. But regardless, I wanted an SLR. I love the spec and the color combination on this one. And I was really, really excited to buy it. So I'm very, very happy that Tyler told me about it. I'm happy that Glossit was able to support us. And I hope that you will visit their website to get your free bottle of their Gloss Enhancer Detail Spray. It is a really, really good product. And honestly, I couldn't have bought this car without them. And so I definitely appreciate that. This car had many, many more interesting nights in its relationship and ownership under Paris Hilton. And I'll talk more about those in some future stories. But I gotta say, after driving it a good bit, I love it. I think it's gonna be a long-term fixture in the stable. I gotta put some tires on it. The tires that were on it were 11 years old, one of them installed inside out. So it's gonna do that. It's about to pass emissions and hopefully get a license plate here in the great state of Georgia, easier than most of my cars have been in their recent acquisition. But you know, it doesn't have a bunch of lights on. It seems to be behaving itself, and I can't wait to put many more miles and maybe even add some more interesting stories. I'm not sure that's realistic. I don't think I'll ever top that, but I will certainly enjoy it and have a lot of fun and put many more interesting miles on this SLR.
That he said he would never own an Evora or any Lotus again. If you talk to any car salesman about what they do during the day, if they're honest with you, they'll probably say they sit around a lot twiddling their thumbs. And particularly early in your career in car sales, before you've sort of built up a customer base to sort of call upon to do repeat deals, you do sit around a lot. And particularly in an exotic store where 90 to 95% of the people that walk through the doors have no means or intention to buy a car anytime soon, you do a lot of tour guiding and drinking coffee and, you know, reading the internet. But I learned early on that even though I had some terrific customers who were going to buy 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 cars a year, that really didn't keep me busy enough. And so I started to call upon a lot of used car dealers, and particularly independent exotic car stores. They would always need inventory. So I could literally sell those guys a car just about any day. So I would look through our trades and things like that and offer them around and usually make a little bit of profit and move a lot of cars. But they don't buy new cars. And the manufacturers and my boss always wanted me to sell a lot of new cars, and generally I would, but one month I was just having a really, really slow time. And so I had this idea to sort of have myself a personal challenge to see if I could put together 4 trade assist deals. And you might have never heard of trade assistance, but it probably happens more often than you think. And it's actually related to lemon law. Lemon law is something that protects consumers from manufacturers fundamentally selling them defective cars. And if you have a repeated service issue, your car might be subject to lemon law. And it depends on your state, but in most states, if you have the same issue 3 times, if your car is down for more than 30 days, or if you have a repeated safety-related issue with your car, you can invoke lemon law and you can use a lawyer to compel the manufacturer to buy the car back. And it's not an easy process, but it works, and it's designed to protect consumers. And that's sort of what dealers exist, sort of to mediate and moderate that type of exchange and the deals that tend to happen there, because it's not really in the interest of the manufacturer, as you might imagine, to end up buying the car back. It hurts their reliability statistics, and they end up owning a car that's worth very little because it has a branded title. In the same way that a car would have a branded title if it were salvaged and then rebuilt or stolen and then recovered, a lemon law car has a branded title. And the manufacturers will in general sell them back to the dealers as used inventory that would then be marketed and disclosed as having been a lemon car. So that hurts the value considerably, and most banks will not finance them. So it's in the best interest of the manufacturer to use trade assistance when it's necessary to avoid lemon law. And in most cases, the consumer still wants a car, they just want one that works. And so the dealer can sort of step in and ask for trade assistance. And it generally involves looking at the person's trade and what it's really worth as it is, eventually figuring out what it's probably going to take to get it fixed so that it can just be sold as a normal used car. and then look at what they might want to buy and kind of what that gap is that the manufacturer might need to make up. Because the alternative is, if we let it go all the way to lemon law, they've got a lot of legal expenses that end up being the responsibility for reimbursement by the manufacturer, the full purchase price, taxes, any interest paid on a loan, and it gets really, really expensive, and it makes everybody not like each other. On the other hand, if this guy just doesn't like this car, but he wants that car, and the manufacturer just wants that to go back into the used inventory and not really be their problem, it usually doesn't take that much money to make a deal. But it creates a deal where one wouldn't exist. And that month, that's what I needed. So we represented Lamborghini, Aston Martin, McLaren, and Lotus. And I didn't fancy myself shrewd enough to negotiate multiple trade assist deals with the same manufacturer at the same time, so I figured I need one of each. So I had an Aston Martin customer who had come to me a couple of years prior to that with a DB9 to trade. And he was about $80,000 upside down in a car worth about 50 grand. And what had happened was he bought a car in 2007 and paid all the money for it and financed it for a long time and didn't put that much money down and ended up with a catastrophic amount of negative equity. And he didn't want to write a big check to trade, so we were really looking for something to bury that in. And the only thing that would work was a Virage. When Aston brought out the Virage right between the DB9 and the DBS, nobody bought it. And they sat around for a year, and then they gave us a huge incentive. We could probably discount one $70,000 or $80,000 off sticker to sell. And so it worked perfectly, because even though the incentive was there, banks would still generally loan MSRP for a good credit customer on a brand new car. So we buried pretty much all of it, and he got to drive a new Aston Martin. So he was elated, but he started to have a lot of transmission issues with the car. And it turned out that there was something wrong with the way that one of the sensors was plugged into the transmission control unit. But it took a long time to figure that out, and it was in several times before we could really replicate it enough. And he was starting to get upset because it was a long way from his house to the dealership, and he had mentioned lemon law. Now, as a dealer, my franchise agreement says I can't initiate those types of discussions. I can answer questions about it and direct them to attorneys and things like that, but until it becomes a trade assist opportunity, it's not really something I can say the first word about. But it's important that in this case, he had already brought it up and was interested in trying to find something that was possible. And at some point he wanted a Vanquish, but he also really liked this V12 Vantage S we had just gotten. And so I called the manufacturer and said, look, we've got this guy, his car's been down a whole lot of days, he's getting upset, but I think we could probably make a deal. But his Virage is worth this and the Vantage is worth this, so I'm probably gonna need about this much money to make a deal, or else I do think he's gonna take it all the way to lemon law. So they kind of went back and forth, and eventually they granted it. So I had my first deal done. The Lamborghini one I knew was going to be a little bit more challenging because quite honestly the V10 cars never broke and the V12 cars don't usually get driven that much, but the Aventadors were breaking occasionally with the solenoid issue that I mentioned in another video, but it was kind of rare for it to go much beyond that, and that usually only took a few days. But I did have one customer with an Aventador that had required 2 transmission replacements. It was an early Aventador Roadster and it had been down for a while, but the guy was a great customer. He'd bought a bunch of cars. He was just getting frustrated with the fact that he was without his car so often. And so he had mentioned the question of lemon law and things like that to me, but the car hadn't really depreciated that much. So in that case, it's actually a really good opportunity for the manufacturer to do something that seems very nice for the customer, but really doesn't cost them that much. Because we could sort of take the new car profit off a car that they hadn't allocated to us and get his used car sold for a strong market value like they were bringing, and it didn't cost them much to make this guy really, really happy. So they kind of jumped at that opportunity, and I moved his car to another used car dealer that was happy to have it, and he ordered a brand new one. So that was 2 deals down. McLarens, they break all the time, so there's always something, but they're not really that big of a deal, and it's a lot of software updates, so it's kind of hard to get one down for 30 days, and they're usually not safety related, it's just electrical quirks and things like that. But I had a guy who had a 12C coupe, and it had some problems, so I got him a 12C Spider, and then it had some problems, and he really wanted a 650S, but the 650 had come out and really made the 12Cs depreciate so badly that he didn't want to write the check. And he was starting to sort of grumble about lemon law and things like that, but he didn't know much about it. So he was just asking me some questions, and I said, look, no, before you go that way, let me talk to these guys, and let me tell them kind of where you're at, what you're looking to do, and that if they'll chip in a little bit to make this deal happen, you'll be a happy customer. And he was like, all right, see what you can do. And so I talked to them, and they were hearing a lot about things like this because, they're not the most reliable cars on earth. But they eventually said, yes, we need to move more 650s because they weren't flying off the shelf. And they chipped in a bit. I got his car sold, and everybody ended up happy. The Lotus deal was a little bit different, and I mentioned it, or at least alluded to it in a previous video, but we had this customer whose car just had all these build quality issues, and it would creak and rattle and squeak, and it was really miserable to drive. And this is the guy that told me that he would just crank his Adele up all the way so that her screaming would sort of overcome all the noises and ridiculousness of the car. This customer was actually the only customer that I ever saw get trade assistance for a car to buy something from another manufacturer, because he was so upset with the build quality issues on his Evora S that he said he would never own an Evora or any Lotus again. And so he wanted something else, and he really had his eye on this Vantage. So we told Lotus, like, hey, I think you're going to end up having to buy this thing back, but if you'll chip in to this deal, I can get this car sold and I can put him in this Aston with an incentive, and it's not going to cost that much, and I think it puts you in a lot better position. And they were actually really grateful at that suggestion. So they sent us a check and we got the deal done, and everybody ended up happy. So I went 4 for 4 that week in getting these trade assist deals done and got 4 new units on the board. But it was a weird week for sure, and the manufacturers were not looking for me to call again the next week.
How was it to drive?
Boring. Another car I bought during that time was a Mclaren F1, one of the 63 roadworthy cars known to exist. And I negotiated with it, with the gentleman's lawyer for about a day and a half. We couldn't come to terms, and after about a day and a half, they wanted $1.3 million, I offered him $1.2 million. We parted ways. A year later to that weekend, I got a phone call from the lawyer saying, do you still want that car? And I completely forgot about it. And I said, sure. And he said, okay, it's yours for $1.2 million, like, as we discussed and as you wanted to pay. And I said, okay. I wired the money, and the next day I sent McCulloch Transportation a flatbed to get it. Well, what I didn't know anything about the car, other than I did know the provenance of it. I'd spoken to a gentleman that personally inspected that car a month before I bought it. And that car had some serious work done to it at the factory. And so I knew the car was a really good mechanical car. The car was born silver, and he repainted it as orange, which I loved. So he sent it back to the factory, which I got a gel coat. They stripped it right down, the fiberglass, everything off of it to do this. I had pictures of the process. They charged him 250,000 pounds to repaint the car. I'd never heard of such a thing. But when I saw the process of what they had to do, it was a 6-month process. It was crazy. So they have a program with McLarens. When you own one of those McLarens, back then it was factory direct to the consumer. There weren't any middlemen, there weren't any dealers. There wasn't anywhere you could really take that car to get serviced, and they would look after it. So they dealt with you directly via satellite. They have a hookup in those cars where you hook up your laptop with a modem that comes with the car. So they have direct link to your car, and they can troubleshoot it. They can examine the car mechanically for you while they're in the UK and you're sitting there in your garage in Atlanta, Georgia. And one of the things they offer when you buy a McLaren used is they give you the first service and first inspection free. So they literally fly over their mechanic from London or from the UK, and they come inspect the car for a couple days, give you a checklist of what they think needs to be done with the car, and then it's your choice whether you want it done. And you have options. You can fly it back to the factory to have it done in the factory, or you can send it to one of 2 service centers they have in the US. They have an East Coast and a West Coast. What I didn't realize when I bought the car, and a lot of people always talk about, oh, my car's made for the track, it's a road going, but it's a race car. This truly was built as a race car first, and then they made it street legal. Where when you buy your Ferraris and Lamborghinis, they're truly road cars that you can take to the racetrack. So the theory behind the car and the real makeup of the cars, it was truly a race car. And with race cars, not only do things wear out after a race, but they time out. And in particular, this car, which of course I've learned all this after the fact, was that there were items on the car that timed out, like, for instance, the fuel cell. They have a lifespan of 5 years, whether you use it for a day, an hour, or don't use it at all. In 5 years, you're required to replace the fuel cell. Same with the fire extinguisher. Same goes with the tires. Same goes with the clutch. The clutch is good for 2,000 to 3,000 miles, but they claim after 3 years you need a new clutch. So it's a timed out type of car. I sat down and figured out that this car, if I never drove it a single mile, would cost me $50,000 a year, based upon all the things they told me from the factory that timed out. So I thought to myself, okay, I paid $1.2 million. I've probably got a good couple of years before I'm going to maybe start losing money on this proposition. So I go and start driving the car, and truthfully, I only use it to pick up my son from school. It's a carpool car. There really isn't anywhere for me to take it other than a racetrack, and I'm not the kind of person that takes my cars to racetracks. I enjoy my cars, and I don't really want to see them either damaged or wrecked, and I don't have that much faith in myself to tear around in a car that I'm not that familiar with on a racetrack. After about 4 months of owning the car and having it factory inspected, of course, I get the list with all the values of what needs to be done to the car, and it was $250,000 worth of work. And it floored me because this car had just been serviced 4 months prior to me buying it, and it just came back from the factory then. And I'm thinking, holy gosh, how can this be $250,000? Well, one of the items was the tires needed to be replaced. The tires, I didn't realize it, were 3 years old, but they didn't have less tread on them from brand new because there was only about 100 kilometers driven on this car since those tires were put on it. So I said, okay, what can tires cost? I'm used to paying $1,000 a tire maybe on my Ferraris and Lamborghinis. Well, the tires were $50,000, but it wasn't $50,000 for the tires. It was $50,000 from the time you were going to remove the old tires and set up the new tires, because this was a race car, not a street car. A street car, when you mount tires, you balance them. On a race car, you only can balance tires on the car when you take it around a track. You can't balance tires because you're not just balancing the tires, you're adjusting the suspension system to the tires you've put on, and every tire is different. So they were explaining this to me in a very lengthy situation on the telephone, and I said, well, I've got to really think about this and figure this all out. And then the proposition with that $50,000 was, here's the list I can remember. It was around $7,000 for the tires. It was a couple $1,000s to rent the racetrack. In North Carolina, it was near the BMW factory. It was a couple $1,000s to send the car up there and bring it back in an enclosed trailer. It was $1,000 for the driver. It was $1,000 for the ambulance that had to be at the racetrack. It was $5,000 of liability insurance with my insurance company to even send it up there. It was a couple $1,000s of liability insurance to pay to BMW for using the racetrack. And then it was another couple $1,000s to actually set the car up with mechanics that had to be on the scene at the racetrack. So it was a long, involved proposition just to change a set of tires. And it started, to be honest with you, at the time turning me off about owning the car. Because I'm thinking to myself, when the fuel cell needs to be replaced, they quoted me $110,000 for the fuel cell. But it wasn't just the fuel cell. It was either shipping this car to BMW's factory in the Carolinas or sending it back over to London, or to England. They're not in London, but to England. And I'm thinking, well, they're only telling me $110 for the actual fuel cell, but what does it really cost? And they couldn't give me those numbers until I was ready to do it, because things change. And then the fire extinguisher, that expired. That was $800 for a fire extinguisher I could literally go to Walmart and buy for $9.99. And they wanted to charge me $800 because their fire extinguisher was purpose-built to fit in this little hole on this little strap that, would be basically attached back to the body. And I'm going, for a lousy little fire extinguisher you get for $10, they want $800 for it. And this kind of thing went on and on and on. It just, and the car comes with a BMW engine, so you would think, how expensive is it to maintain a BMW engine? This isn't a McLaren purpose-built engine for racing. It's really off the shelf. That's why the car was kind of bulletproof. That's what attracted me to the car to begin with, was this isn't really a prototype hand-built car, even though the body is, but the engine itself is bulletproof, proven engine from BMW. I would say after about a year, I figured, well, I don't know that I want to be upside down in this car, because at the time the car wasn't appreciating like it has. And it's probably one of my few regrettable sells I've ever had, over probably owning 1,000 cars, is selling that car. As we all know today, that car's a $15 million plus car.
Does somebody owe you $1 million for a McLaren F1 that's in Mexico tied to El Chapo? Now, I've often said that my personal dream car is a manual transmission Lamborghini Murcielago LP640. I own one and I can't imagine ever being without it, but the end-all be-all money no object dream car for me, like many car enthusiasts, is a McLaren F1. Now, of course, I don't have a personal life trajectory that's going to mean that I spend 10, 15, 20 million dollars on one of the 106 cars that exist. Some of them, the LMs, are probably worth $30 million or more today. So I don't really think, barring any drastic life changes, that I'm ever going to have one, and I'm very happy with my Lamborghini. But I do harbor the fantasy that one day, one of the cars that's not accounted for, one that has some bad history, too many miles, is in really bad shape, or hidden in a barn somewhere, that I might find it, and it might be the way that I end up owning one of these cars. About 9 months ago, I got contacted by a VINwiki viewer saying that he thought he knew where the missing McLaren F1 in Mexico was. And he had some information that was unique to the car, not the kind of stuff that you could just go out and Google, and he said that he had some ties to the people who had control of the car. Now, the car in question is chassis 39. Now, keep in mind, there is not like a consummate registry of all of the McLaren F1 VINs. We have probably the most complete list in the VINwiki app of the McLaren F1 VINs, but again, it's very much a working list, not complete by any means, because not even the factory has disclosed all that. Most of the chassis numbers are pretty public and people know about them, but the full VINs and where they are and things like that is still shrouded in a lot of mystery for a lot of them, especially this car. Now, the car in question is Brazilian brown metallic with a red interior and now gold wheels. It was built late in 1995, we think, and it could be with a build date that was in 1996 or in 1995. Now, the car was being built for the CEO of McLaren, Ron Dennis. And when it was completed, his wife thought it was so hideous due to the specification that she refused to let him own it. And he ended up buying Chassis 50, a magnesium silver car. And so the car was supposedly sold to a local buyer in the UK who drove it a little bit, but it was still being marketed for sale by the factory. And in 1997, it is generally thought that the car was sold into Mexico. Now, there are rumors that it was sold through a dealer in Texas into Mexico, and also that it went illegally through Brazil. Regardless, there are pictures of the car in 1997, so the car somehow makes it to Mexico. Now, this chassis, chassis 39, is frequently confused with chassis 29, the other brown McLaren F1. That one is called Creighton Brown, and it was built for Creighton Brown, who was one of the shareholders that helped Ron Dennis take over McLaren in the 80s and run it into the 90s, and was also very much attached to the racing program and things like that. Now, the most interesting thing about the car in these 1997 photos was actually the registration plate, P440CPJ, a UK plate. Now, obviously the car had made it into Mexico, but it was still wearing the UK license plate. And that was a little bit confusing, but it's gotten a lot more confusing lately because that license plate is now seen regularly on McLaren F1 GTR Chassis 06R, a car that's owned and driven regularly by David Clark. Now, he worked with the factory in sales when the F1 was new, and he's the man largely credited with taking the F1 racing so successfully. So this is the Harrods livery car, and it's driven in all these events all over the world, and it usually has this license plate on it. And so that was something I never really understood, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now, there are a ton of rumors surrounding what happened to Chassis 39 when it went into Mexico. And a lot of them contradict, but they are all consistent in that the car was owned by someone very close to Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. El Chapo, obviously known to be the leader of the Sinaloa cartel for some time. Now, he was in prison from 1993 until his first escape in 2001, when this car would have gone into Mexico. Now, many of the rumors say that the owner's name was Ricardo Beltran, and that he went by the nickname El Robachivas, which means the goat thief. And there's no other real mention of someone named Ricardo Beltran attached to El Chapo in that period of time. There was a Beltran family cartel that sort of spun off of the Sinaloa cartel at one point. There are some people named Ricardo Beltran that are a little bit younger and now connected to trafficking money and laundering money into the US. Hard to say. There was another person, though, that did go by the nickname of the goat thief, El Robachivas, but his name was Humberto Ojeda. And he was very close to El Chapo, very high up, and known to be one of the most prolific drug runners that El Chapo had. He was known to make $300 million moving 220 tons of cocaine for the cartel. And he was killed by another member of the cartel in 1997. Now, that is consistent with the rumor about the car because the owner of the car was known to have been killed sometime in the late 90s or early 2000s. That's really where the story gets almost the most ridiculous. When this guy gets killed, whoever the owner is, he had not told anyone where the keys were to his McLaren F1. And so the family and the cartel, anybody connected to him, wanted to hide the car because, of course, at the time, the government was trying to seize anything they could that was related to the cartel or El Chapo. And so they hide the car supposedly under a tarp in a field in rural Sinaloa, but regardless, it went away. So nobody from that point on knew where the car was. Now, the rumor was that whoever had control of the car inquired to the factory around 2004 asking to buy a key for it. Now, presumably because the guy who owned it was dead, it was in Mexico, it may not even have come in there legally in the first place, they probably did not have any ownership documentation. And I would assume, like most key orders, you had to prove that they owned it. So regardless, McLaren said no the first time. But according to the rumors, they persisted, and on their second request, McLaren quoted them either $200,000 or 200,000 pounds, which would have been about $300,000 at the time. Now keep in mind, in 2004, when this would have been happening, that's the same year that I was offered the collection of Wyclef Jean's cars, the McLaren F1 he had with about 40,000 miles, his Pagani Zonda S, and his Ferrari 360 Spider, all for $900,000. Of the package, we thought 600 or so was the F1. So this may have been half of what this car was worth. And keep in mind, it was brown over red with gold wheels. Now, there's barely any photographs of this car, but it's generally thought to be one of the uglier F1s. In fact, it was so ugly that the person it was built for, the person mostly responsible for its actual existence in the world, couldn't even own it. Now, at this point, I think that's what makes it awesome. Not only this amazing story that goes with it, but the fact that it's a very unique, very strange off-the-wall color combination. What could be better? Brown cars are awesome. So obviously the family says no to this ridiculous quote, and the car just sits. So presumably at the point that this guy's contacting me, telling me that he knows where it is with pretty specific ideas in terms of proximity to different places, so he has pretty high confidence that he knows who has control of the car and where it's located. And his real ask of me is, Ed, could you help me find a buyer so we can make a commission on this? Now, of course, my immediate thought after putting all the pieces together is, this may be my only chance to buy a McLaren F1. Because you think about it, all right, let's say the car would be worth 8, 10, 12 million bucks if it's perfect, which it is not. It's been sitting for 16 years. It was inevitably bought with profits made from the trafficking of drugs, so it may always be subject to being seized by the Mexican government. It probably has no ownership documentation, so you're going to be buying this thing on a handshake and a bill of sale, if you can even go down there, because I had been told that I could never go to this part of Mexico safely. Doesn't matter how many bodyguards you have, like, it's just not the place you go. Now, not to disparage Mexico, it's just, obviously it's cartel territory and you're trying to do business with the cartel, and I don't think they're the people that I want to shrewdly negotiate with. But regardless, it's got all these devaluing factors, not the least of which is it doesn't have a key. It's going to take a multi-million-dollar restoration if you go through the factory, probably $500,000 if you were to do it in the US. There's a lot of things between this car where it is and wiring the money to a cartel and probably getting audited every year for the rest of your life and having a McLaren F1 that you can own, drive, and use. So I'm thinking this car may only be worth 2 to 3 million bucks. Now, that's a ton of money. It's more than my net worth, but hey, it's not 10. It's an awesome F1. I know a lot of banks, and I could probably make this happen. Now, knowing a lot of banks also came up in my research of this car because I talked to someone who knows about most of the F1s in the US, and he knew about this car. In fact, he knew a lot about this car because about 5 years ago, in his research of it, he heard a rumor that a US leasing company, a bank, had a lien against this car for $1 million when it was sold into Mexico. Now, very few leasing companies were going to even write a lien for that much back then, and they certainly weren't going to let the car go out of the country, but anything could happen. So I call Mitch at Premier Financial Services, one of the supporters of the VINwiki channel, not only to say, hey, I may need the biggest loan you've ever thought I would ever ask for, but also, does somebody owe you $1 million for a McLaren F1 that's in Mexico tied to El Chapo? And he said, maybe to the first thing, no to the second thing. I called the other banks that it might have been. They all said no. But this guy's idea, bright idea, had been to buy out the loan, travel with a tow truck to Sinaloa and repossess the car from the cartel. Now, fortunately, he had some very intelligent friends who knew a lot more about Western Mexico, and they told him that was a really, really bad idea and that he would not make it out alive. And so not worth the risks there. So he had kind of dropped it at that point. But again, I had to do some more research to make sure that I wouldn't even be buying a car that had this crazy lien attached to it. At this point, we're into June, July, and his travel plans keep getting pushed back. The COVID shutdown of the borders that was keeping us from being able to drive to Alaska via Canada to shoot the Avalon King S55 off the cliff was also stopping my McLaren F1 treasure hunt into Mexico. And so he keeps telling me he can't go. Even though he has dual citizenship, Mexico and the US, he just couldn't get across the border, not even to go to grandma's house most of the time, unfortunately. And so his plans keep getting pushed back and pushed back. And eventually, it looks like he's going to be able to go. But then he introduces this unexpected wrinkle. His side hustle, like many VINwiki viewers and fans, is buying and selling cars. And he said he had this car that he really needed to sell in order to finance his trip for him and the couple of friends that were going to go with him down to Mexico to hunt for this McLaren F1. And it was a Jaguar XJR, I think an 07, that he wanted like 15 grand for, which was probably 50 to 80% over true wholesale for this car. And of course, I'm like, dude, I just want you to find this car. We had talked about what a reasonable finder's fee was, considering that I wanted to buy the car rather than us trying to market it somewhere else and get a commission that we might split. And I was like, look, if we can get this deal done, I'm going to pay you $25,000, $50,000, whatever is fair for you finding me what's hopefully like a $1.5, $2 million car maybe. And so, I said, look, I'm going to take care of you. If I need to do that preemptively by buying this Jaguar, I'm going to do it. And in that moment, it occurred to me that this might be the greatest scam ever conceived against me, because there was no way I wasn't going to offer to buy that Jaguar at almost whatever price he wanted. Who cares if it's twice wholesale money? I want him to go. And worst case, I'm just the world's most reluctant Jaguar owner, and the Jaguar comes with this story attached to it. And so I'm like, I'm probably getting scammed, but I'll do it. But then I knew it wasn't a scam because he didn't let me. Because the next week, El Chapo's kids started a street war over the territory. I think his nephew got killed. It was a massive mess, and he's like, look, no one can go to Sinaloa right now. Nobody's gonna go to Culiacan and look for anything, much less ask around for a McLaren. So we're sidelined again, back to the drawing board. Over the next few weeks, nothing happens. Finally in November, he's able to make it down. And unfortunately, he learns pretty quickly that the person who he had been told was in control of the car and was interested in selling it had passed away a couple of years prior. So the friend of a friend who thought they knew and all these things. And he did have a lot of confidence that that was the gatekeeper to the car. But unfortunately, that's kind of where the trail dried up. And he's still asking around. We're still trying to figure out if the car is there. Now, another rumor had around that time been presented to me unsolicited. So somebody else from Instagram contacts me and says, I heard that the missing McLaren F1 in Mexico went to Mexico City about a year ago at a very, very cheap price and was repainted black, and that the owner was never going to let it see the light of day again. Okay, perhaps that could happen. It's staying in Mexico was always going to be a really likely thing because getting it across a border was never going to be easy. Now, fortunately, it was in the possession of people very good at getting things across the border, but that did kind of make sense. There were a lot of very wealthy people all around Mexico, certainly in Mexico City, that might have wanted a trophy McLaren F1 to just put away and show people they really, really trust. There's also legitimately another black McLaren F1 that has been in Mexico City. So it's possible that the person contacting me had just seen that and assumed there was only one McLaren F1 ever in Mexico, which is not true, and kind of put the stories together. But regardless, I chased that through several people that would know, and nobody even knew if the black car was still there, and certainly they didn't know or believe that it was the brown car that had been painted black. So nobody knows where this car is. My guy comes back to the US, kind of sorry, sad, whatever. I'm like, dude, this has been a wild adventure and something that I very much enjoyed digging into, but I really wasn't done digging. I wanted to find out what else could be known. Now, in the VINwiki app, most people make posts based on license plates, but we get the VINs from the government agencies for the plates, and we post by VIN. So we reference the license plates, but all the posts are categorized by VIN so that when a car gets a different license plate on it in the US, which happens all the time, usually for every registration, we're able to keep tracking the cars. And that only works in the app for the US. Now, it works for other countries. We're still developing out an international version, but it does work in the UK. So I ran P440CPJ through the VINwiki app's UK backend, and the VIN that it comes back to is for chassis 39, not the race car VIN. There are services like Carfax and AutoCheck where you can get broader vehicle history reporting in the UK. It's not quite as comprehensive, but it's useful. And so I ran it through one of those, and usually you enter it by the registration plate rather than the VIN there, because it actually only shows you the last of the VIN. But it is the last of chassis 39's VIN that goes to that plate in the UK, consistently registered for full MOT since 2005. There's several theories about why that might be. One is that he legitimately bought the tag. You can do that. There's a huge market for buying license plates. It's how Shmee gets all of his. And they can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, this one's not a clever word or something pertaining to an F1. It doesn't really make sense that it would be that desirable, probably not desirable enough that you'd want to be known to send money to a cartel in Mexico in order to buy it. But that's one possibility. The other is that he knew that at one point this was a registration to a McLaren F1 in the UK, and he just wanted to remake the tags, which I believe is very illegal, put them on his car, knowing that if anybody ever runs it, they're going to see some McLaren F1. He probably has one with no visible VINs, and he says, I'll be able to drive it without having to pay Lanzante to street convert my GTR and make it less race car-ish. Maybe he wanted to keep it as pure as it could be and still be able to drive it around on the road. That's a possibility. The other possibility, because that registration began in 2005, is that in 2004, when the family or whomever in the cartel contacted McLaren trying to buy a key, they said no. Then eventually they said half the car's value, essentially designed to say, well, what do we do with this car? Maybe the factory said, hey, here's a guy who we know quite well, and he'll buy your car. And he'll secretly get it out of Mexico, not want to make it public because he doesn't want the Mexican government to come find his car and seize it. But he just moves the license plate onto his other McLaren F1, which he drives around regularly, takes to Goodwood, does all the things with, and pretends that it's that car. There's no way to know, but if I were to guess, I bet he's got that car tucked away in a dark basement with some whiskey on the walls and some beautiful car posters, and he only goes down there to be with his McLaren or his other McLaren and show people that he really, really trusts. But if I was that rich and I was presented with that opportunity, I think that's exactly what I would do. But who knows? No one knows where chassis 39 is, but over the last 9 months or so, I have truly enjoyed the treasure hunt to try to find it. We'd like to thank Premier Financial Services for supporting this video in this month of VINwiki Car Stories. Be sure to check them out now at the link in the description below to learn just how easy it can be to own your dream car with the help from Premier. Their Simple Lease is an awesome program and one of the most powerful tools in the world of exotic car financing. It's got some great perks. It can be very useful for taxes and everything else that leases are known for, while giving you all the purchasing power you could ever dream of. So be sure to check them out at the link in the description below now and thank them for their support of VINwiki.